thought it was just another quiet evening, until one close moment changed everything between us. It was one of those evenings that felt like nothing would happen, the kind you could almost sleepwalk through without noticing the quiet magic in the air. I had arrived at her place, the small, warmly lit apartment she called home, expecting just to help her unpack a few books and maybe share a cup of tea. But the moment I stepped inside, I realized how ordinary this evening could never really be with her. She was there, naturally poised, moving through her space with that effortless grace that made everything around her seem warmer, softer. I watched her adjust a vase on the windowsill, the golden light from the setting sun catching the highlights in her hair. She didn't notice me staring, or maybe she did and chose not to comment. Her laughter floated through the room when she recounted a small mishap from her day, a soft, familiar sound that always seemed to find its way into my chest, leaving a little echo of contentment behind. I settled on the edge of the sofa, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really just observing her. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, pouring tea, flipping pages, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and every subtle motion seemed to reveal a little more about who she was. Confident yet unhurried, warm but quietly vulnerable. It was in these small things I noticed the pull she had on me, the gentle gravity that made it impossible to look away. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, her favorite lotion, a scent that lingered in the corners of the room and seemed to settle around me. I could hear the distant hum of evening traffic outside, the occasional bird calling as the last light bled from the sky. Every sound felt amplified, every movement slowed, as if the world outside had paused, leaving just us. She laughed again, turning toward me with a casual smile that seemed to mean more than just friendliness. Her eyes met mine for a fraction longer than necessary, and I felt it, the strange, warming awareness that this moment was different, that her presence always managed to pull me into its orbit. My chest felt a little tighter, my hands a little warmer, and I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing. I wanted to reach out, to let her know how much I valued this simple closeness, but something held me back, a respect for the boundaries we had, a hesitation that whispered that rushing this wouldn't make it better. Instead, I stayed quiet, letting her light and laughter fill the room, letting the warmth of her nearness seep into me. It was a simple evening. Nothing extraordinary happened, and yet, for reasons I couldn't name, it already felt like it could never be forgotten. This quiet comfort, the gentle pull of her presence, and the unspoken understanding between us set the stage for everything that was about to change. Sometimes, it takes nothing more than a simple, ordinary evening to remind you that the smallest moments can leave the deepest marks. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that encourages conversation without forcing it. I was leaning back on the couch, sipping the tea she had poured for me, when I noticed a subtle shift in her posture. She was usually so composed, her confidence a gentle armor she carried effortlessly. But tonight, there was a softness to her shoulders, a slight tension in her hands that didn't go unnoticed. We talked about trivial things at first, the mundane stories of the day, the little frustrations of work, the fleeting pleasures of a good book. But then, almost imperceptibly, the conversation tilted. She paused, as if weighing whether to let her next words escape, and I realized she was choosing me, in this moment, to hear something she rarely shared with anyone. "I've been feeling a little out of place lately," she admitted, her voice low and steady, but carrying a vulnerability I hadn't often heard. She looked down at her hands, twisting the thin silver band on her finger absent-mindedly. The room felt smaller, suddenly, quieter, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. I didn't interrupt. I just stayed still, letting her words fill the space. As she spoke, I noticed the subtle way she revealed herself without realizing it. Her knee brushed mine lightly as she shifted on the couch, and for a heartbeat, it felt electric in its simplicity. Warmth spread through me, a gentle pulse of awareness that neither of us could ignore. She didn't pull away, and neither did I, caught in a suspended moment of connection. Her eyes occasionally lifted to mine, and in those brief glances, I saw a mixture of hesitation and trust. She was letting me in, piece by piece, letting me witness the cracks beneath her otherwise poised exterior. Her voice, usually steady and confident, wavered at the edges, carrying a quiet honesty that made me ache to reassure her, to tell her it was okay to lean on someone else. The scent of her jasmine lotion lingered again, mingling with the faint warmth of the tea. I could feel the subtle rhythm of her breath, the rise and fall of her chest as she leaned slightly toward me, as if instinctively seeking comfort in proximity. It wasn't a romantic gesture, at least not yet, but it was intimate in a way that words couldn't capture. I found myself listening not just to her words, but to the pauses, the quiet spaces between her sentences where she seemed to weigh every emotion carefully. Each hesitation, each soft exhale, made her more human, more real, more magnetic. I wanted to reach out, to let her know I was there, fully present, but I stayed still, respecting the fragility of the moment. By the time she finished speaking, the air between us had changed. It was warmer, heavier with unspoken understanding, yet delicate, like the first brush of sunlight over a still lake. She hadn't said anything about us, or even hinted at what might come, but I knew that this evening, this quiet opening of her heart, had shifted something irrevocably. We had crossed an invisible line, and neither of us could unsee the possibility that lingered there. The room had grown quieter as the evening deepened, the soft hum of distant traffic and the faint whisper of wind outside forming a gentle soundtrack. I could feel the subtle shift in her energy, the way her movements slowed, as if she were unconsciously aware that this moment might stretch longer than usual. She was seated across from me on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, hands resting lightly in her lap. I couldn't stop noticing the way her fingers flexed, tracing invisible patterns, betraying a restlessness she didn't voice. It happened almost imperceptibly. She reached for a notebook that had slid to the floor, leaning across me with an easy familiarity I hadn't felt before. Our knees brushed lightly, just a fleeting contact, but the sensation sent a ripple through me. It was warm and grounding, electric in its subtlety. Her breath brushed my arm as she shifted closer. I caught the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the lingering aroma of tea. Everything around us seemed to fade. The faint ticking of the clock, the hum of the streetlights outside, as if the world had slowed to match the sudden gravity of proximity. Her hand lingered near mine for a moment longer than necessary as she retrieved the notebook. I was acutely aware of the space between us, the faint pressure of her shoulder brushing mine. There was a quiet intimacy in that simple closeness, a weightless tension that neither of us had acknowledged before. She glanced at me, eyes catching the warm lamplight, and I felt that familiar pull again, the magnetic awareness that we were teetering on the edge of something unspoken. I wanted to reach for her hand, to let her know that her nearness was felt, that it mattered, but I hesitated. There was a beauty in restraint, in allowing the moment to breathe. Instead, I let my gaze linger on her, observing the way her lips parted slightly as she spoke, the soft incline of her cheek catching the lamp's glow. Each detail etched itself into my memory, every nuance magnified by the stillness of the room. She shifted again, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers lingering just long enough to graze my arm. It was accidental, or perhaps instinctual, but the warmth of contact was undeniable. I noticed the subtle hitch in her breath, the way her pulse seemed to press closer to the surface, as if her body, like mine, recognized the tension that words couldn't name. Our eyes met, holding, neither breaking away, communicating volumes in silence. Time itself seemed to stretch, each second elongating into a quiet eternity. In that suspended space, I realized how much I had been craving this connection. The simple closeness, the unspoken acknowledgement that something was changing between us. I could feel the gentle cadence of her heartbeat through the small spaces where we touched, a rhythm that mirrored my own growing awareness. By the time she leaned back slightly, drawing a fraction away from the accidental intimacy, neither of us spoke immediately. The room remained still, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. That brief, subtle contact had opened a door, an unspoken understanding that everything had slowed down, just for us, and that the ordinary had already begun to feel extraordinary. The evening had settled into a quiet intimacy, the kind that makes every sound sharper, every breath heavier. We sat close on the couch now, the space between us smaller than usual. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, subtle but unmistakable, and the gentle rise and fall of her chest with each breath made my own rhythm stutter in response. Nothing had changed outwardly. There were no grand gestures, no words of confession, but the air was charged, as though we both knew that something significant had just begun to shift. It started in the smallest way. She reached for the book I had been holding, her fingers brushing mine as she took it. The touch was fleeting, yet lingered in my mind, warm and electric, leaving a subtle imprint on my skin. I noticed the slight hitch in her breath as our hands separated, and I realized that neither of us wanted to let go just yet. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment, the world outside that room disappeared. The hum of traffic, the distant creak of the floorboards, the soft glow of the lamp. All of it faded until there was nothing but the quiet closeness between us. She shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, until her shoulder grazed mine. The contact was light, unassuming, but the effect was profound. I could feel the heat of her body, the faint brush of her hair against my arm, the delicate warmth of her skin against mine. She leaned in a fraction closer, and I realized I could feel her heartbeat, subtle but steady, a comforting pulse that mirrored the nervous rhythm in my own chest. My fingers itched to trace her hand, to let her know that I understood, that I felt the same pull she couldn't yet voice. And then, almost without conscious thought, she rested her hand lightly on my chest. The weight was gentle, almost tentative, but it carried an honesty that words could never capture. I lifted my hand and covered hers, curling my fingers around hers, letting the warmth seep into me. It was a simple gesture, yet it felt monumental, an acknowledgement, without speaking, that this closeness was no longer accidental, that the bond we had been building in silence had reached a tipping point. We sat like that for a long moment, neither of us moving, just existing in the shared space of vulnerability and trust. Her eyes softened, and I saw the flicker of something she had been holding back. Surprise, relief, maybe even desire, all tempered by caution. I felt the same. There was no rush, no dramatic confession, just a quiet recognition that something fundamental had changed. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I didn't expect this," and I responded in the gentlest voice I could manage. "Neither did I, but I don't want to step back." The words hung between us, fragile and sincere, a bridge connecting the unspoken feelings we had both harbored for so long. In that one close moment, everything shifted. The ordinary evening we had expected became extraordinary, marked by the quiet intimacy of touch, the honesty in our eyes, and the realization that we had crossed into a space that neither of us could forget. It wasn't a leap. It was a gentle step, a mutual acknowledgement that something new, delicate, and profoundly human had begun between us. After that one close moment, the room felt different, heavier, and warmer at the same time. The air was charged with the quiet electricity of what had just passed between us, but now a tension lingered. A mixture of vulnerability, hesitation, and the uncertain weight of feelings that neither of us fully knew how to name. She leaned back slightly on the couch, her hand drifting to her lap, though I could still see the faint echo of contact on my chest where her fingers had rested. Her eyes met mine, searching, thoughtful, as if trying to understand what this change meant. There was a flicker of fear in them, not of me, not of the connection, but of the consequences of stepping beyond the boundaries we had always maintained. I felt the same. My hand remained near hers, hovering slightly, unsure whether to reach out or give her the space she seemed to crave. The tension wasn't uncomfortable. It was fragile, intimate, alive. She exhaled slowly, a soft, trembling sound, and admitted quietly, almost reluctantly, I don't know if this is right, or if it's allowed. Her voice was gentle, layered with vulnerability, and I felt a pang in my chest. I wanted to tell her it was allowed, that this closeness, this connection, was not wrong. It was human. But I knew words weren't enough. Actions mattered now. Presence mattered. Her fingers twitched slightly, brushing against the edge of her sleeve, and I noticed the small hesitations in her movements. Every shift, every glance, every subtle lean or withdrawal carried meaning. I realized that even in her fear, there was trust enough to let herself feel without pulling away completely. I wanted desperately to honor that trust, to show her through quiet gestures that I would not push, not yet, not until she was ready. So I stayed still. I let my gaze linger, steady and warm, letting her see that I was here, that I was aware of the delicate line we were navigating. And she noticed. Slowly, she reached out, letting the tips of her fingers brush the back of my hand. A tentative, fleeting touch, but enough to anchor both of us in this shared moment. My heart raced, yet I kept my hand gentle, letting her set the pace. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We were both aware of the fragility, the vulnerability, and the beauty of what had begun. Her shoulders, once tight with hesitation, slowly relaxed, as if letting the moment reassure her that she was safe. My chest felt heavy and warm, a mix of longing, care, and the quiet thrill of being seen fully by someone I had admired for so long. Then she whispered, almost to herself, I don't want to go back to pretending this didn't happen. Her words were soft, almost hesitant, yet resolute. And I realized with a quiet certainty that the aftermath of our first true closeness wasn't fear alone. It was the beginning of something tender, patient, and real. The evening stretched on, quiet but alive. Our hands found a natural resting place near each other, our shoulders occasionally brushing, and the unspoken promise lingered. We would explore this new closeness slowly, with care, without rush, and with full awareness of its fragility and beauty. The quiet after our first real closeness hung between us like a soft, fragile curtain. The room felt warmer, more intimate, yet layered with the tension of unspoken possibilities. We sat close on the couch, our shoulders brushing occasionally, and I could feel her heartbeat, slow and steady, through the fabric of her sleeve. It was a small, grounding detail, a reminder that beneath the uncertainty, there was a shared rhythm, a connection that had started to root itself quietly, insistently. She was the first to break the silence, her voice tentative yet steady. I've been thinking about tonight, she said, her fingers brushing mine briefly before retreating to rest on her lap. Her gaze was direct, searching, as if she needed reassurance, not from me, but from herself. I nodded gently, giving her the space to continue without rushing, without pressure. I've spent so long, keeping everything in check, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I told myself I couldn't feel this way, that it wasn't right, but I can't deny it anymore. Her words were soft, but they carried weight, the kind that sinks deep into your chest. I reached out slowly, letting my fingers brush the back of her hand, careful, deliberate. Her eyes flicked down to our hands for a moment before returning to mine, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming at the corner of her lips. I feel it too, I said, keeping my voice calm, measured, steady. I felt it for a while, even when I tried not to, even when I thought I shouldn't. But I don't want to rush anything. I just want to be here, with you, at your pace. My words were gentle, honest, the kind of honesty that I knew mattered more than any grand declaration. I wanted her to know she could trust me, that nothing would be forced, nothing would be hurried. She shifted closer, her hand finding mine fully this time, fingers curling into a natural grip. The warmth of her touch was grounding, familiar, yet electric in its subtle intensity. I want that too, she murmured, a flicker of relief passing through her gaze. I don't want to pretend tonight didn't happen. I don't want to pretend that this connection isn't real. We sat like that for a long moment, fingers intertwined, shoulders leaning just slightly together. It was a quiet acknowledgement of a shared truth, that what had begun between us was worth exploring, worth nurturing, worth respecting. There was no rush, no dramatic leap, just a steady, mutual recognition that this closeness, tender and patient, could grow into something profound. I felt her relax against me, subtly, imperceptibly, yet it carried a weight of trust and hope. Her eyes softened, and I realized that this conversation, so simple, so human, so filled with quiet honesty, had changed everything. The uncertainty, the fear, the hesitation had not vanished, but they had transformed into something warmer. Possibility, patience, and a mutual promise of being present for each other. As the night stretched on, we stayed close, hands entwined, breathing in sync. There was no need for words. The conversation had done its work. The foundation of something real, tender, and enduring had been laid, and both of us knew that the future, whatever it held, would be navigated together. The night had grown deep and still, the world outside muted under the soft glow of streetlights and the gentle hum of distant traffic. Inside, the room felt alive with a quiet warmth, the kind that comes from shared vulnerability and the simple comfort of being fully seen. We sat close on the couch, shoulders brushing naturally, hands intertwined as if they had always belonged that way. There was no need for words anymore. The connection had been spoken in touches, glances, and the careful honesty of our conversation. I could feel the gentle weight of her head resting against my shoulder, the soft exhale of her breath brushing my neck. It was grounding, comforting, and yet electric in its subtle intimacy. I ran my fingers lightly along the back of her hand, tracing the lines of her palm, the curve of her knuckles, letting her know, without speaking, that I was here, present and patient. She responded with the faintest squeeze, a small, unspoken affirmation that she felt the same. The lamp cast a golden glow across the room, highlighting the gentle curve of her profile, the softness in her eyes as she looked up at me. I noticed the small things, the way her hair fell lightly across her cheek, the delicate rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the faint warmth radiating from her wrist into my hand. Every detail felt amplified, every movement charged with the quiet thrill of intimacy that was not hurried, not forced, but fully lived in the present. We leaned into the comfort of proximity, bodies relaxed yet conscious of one another. Occasionally, our knees brushed, a reminder of the closeness that had begun earlier, but now it was familiar, natural, and safe. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the steady warmth of shared understanding. I could feel the subtle rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest, and in that rhythm, I sensed trust, patience, and a fragile but growing promise of something lasting. She spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel, right here, right now, with you. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of all the moments that had led to this night. The laughter, the shared silences, the quiet touches, and the vulnerability that had slowly built between us. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face, tucking it gently behind her ear, feeling the warmth of her cheek against my fingers. Me too, I said quietly, sincerely. I've never felt more sure about anything. The evening stretched on, filled with the gentle cadence of our shared presence. No grand gestures were needed, no dramatic confessions, no rushed declarations. The intimacy was in the simple closeness, fingers intertwined, shoulders leaning together, quiet laughter shared in the spaces between words. The connection we had nurtured carefully and patiently now felt fully realized. As the night deepened, I realized something profound. It wasn't the grand moments that defined this story, but the quiet, ordinary ones that had gradually become extraordinary. One close moment, one lingering touch, one honest conversation had changed everything. And now, as we sat together, warm, safe, and connected, I understood that the story we had begun tonight was only just beginning, but it would be lived fully, patiently, and beautifully together.